This video is brought to you by Magellan TV, a brand new documentary streaming membership service founded by filmmakers, bringing you premium content and diving deep into the subject you want to learn more about. Magellan TV has the richest and most varied content on history available anywhere. Magellan TV has over 2,000 plus documentary movies, series, and exclusive playlists, many available in 4K. They have ancient, modern, current, early modern, war and biographical history, science, space, and even true crime, which can be watched anywhere on your television, laptop, or mobile device. We highly recommend their documentary, The British Empire. In this show, you can learn about how the British Empire spread through its naval power, learn about such important figures as the navigator Captain James Cook and the Duke of Wellington, the importance of the colonies in the Caribbean and North America to the Empire, and the Indian Mutiny, like we'll see in this Simple History episode. All the shows are without interruptions from commercials, and we have a special offer where you can check it all out for free. Simple History viewers get a 1-month free trial membership. Just go to try.magellantv.com/simplehistory or click the link in the description below. Sepoy Mutiny, 1857 through 1858. The Sepoy Uprising, which took place in India in 1857 through 1858, is seen as one of the most shocking insurrections to take place against a colonial power during the 19th century. Although the uprising was ultimately unsuccessful, it fundamentally changed the nature of British rule in the subcontinent and is sometimes known in India as the First War of Independence. British interest in India began in the form of a trade relationship with the Mughal Empire, and the East India Company was formed in 1600 to capitalize on this. Although the company's beginnings in the subcontinent were relatively humble, with trading outposts around Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, its founding charter had granted it permission to wage war, and over the course of the 18th century, vast tracts of India and huge amounts of wealth came under the control not of the British state, but of this privately owned corporation. Needing to protect its Indian assets, the company began to recruit local soldiers and build up its own armies. These would eventually become known as the Bengal, Madras, and Bombay armies. By the early 1800s, these forces numbered nearly 200,000 men, and by the mid-19th century, over 2/3 of the Indian subcontinent was being run as a for-profit enterprise. Over the course of the 18th century, company policies had led to the deaths of huge numbers of Indians and seen almost unimaginable quantities of Indian treasure shipped back to Britain. In the first half of the 19th century, some attempts were made to change India's economic and legal systems and to bring about various social reforms. In fact, there was an increasing concern throughout India regarding the effects of westernization, especially the spread of Christianity and the resulting destruction of local cultures and traditions. From 1849 onwards, the company began to reduce the number of British Army regiments in India, and by 1857, the Bengal Army was comprised of only 24,000 Europeans out of 159,000 men. This was particularly bad timing as there was also growing discontent among the Indian soldiers. Violation of local customs, lack of promotion, and poor pay had led to resentment towards the British officers, as had recent attempts to recruit men from lower castes, which was taken by those from higher castes as an insult to their traditional status. The final spark of the already growing revolt came in the form of new cartridges that were issued for use with the new Enfield rifle. A rumor began to spread throughout the troops that the cartridge paper was greased with either cow or pig fat. This made their use difficult on religious grounds for both Hindu and Muslim soldiers, as the cartridges had to be bitten in order to load the rifle, and their religions forbade eating beef or pork. Further to that, it added fuel to the belief that there was an ongoing attempt to Christianize the country and undermine local customs. On March 29, 1857, Sepoy Mangal Pandey of the 34th Bengal Native Infantry, then stationed at Barrackpore, attacked and wounded several officers. During the incident, he reportedly called out, "Come out, you! The Europeans are here! From biting these cartridges, we shall become infidels! Get ready! Turn out, all of you!" Although his attempt to start an all-out mutiny amongst his fellow soldiers failed, several of them did refuse direct orders to intervene. When it became clear that he would be arrested, Pandey turned his musket on himself and fired directly into his chest. Despite the short range, the wound wasn't fatal, and Pandey was put on trial less than a week later, found guilty, and sentenced to death. The outbreak proper began a couple of months later. on the 10th of May at Meerut, when 85 soldiers of the Bengal Light Cavalry, who had been imprisoned for refusing to use the new cartridges, were set free by the rest of their regiment. The military station was then destroyed, and any Europeans they found murdered. The British were caught on the back foot and were slow to react, allowing the rebellion to spread out from Meerut and take hold across the rest of central and northern India. At the time of the uprising, there were only 35,000 British soldiers in the whole of the subcontinent, and the wait for reinforcements would take months. Fortunately for the British, though, support for the uprising was not universal amongst the Indian population. The Madras and Bombay armies remained largely loyal to the British, as did Punjabi, Muslims, Sikhs, and Gurkhas, who had no interest in seeing a return to Mughal rule. Local rulers also reacted in a variety of different ways. Some were loyal to Britain or wished to remain neutral. Others, though, were angry at the way they had been treated by the company and chose to rebel. There were several major centers of the rebellion: Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Jhansi, and Gwalior. Delhi, under the rule of the now largely powerless Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, was a strategically important city and the first destination for the mutineers from Meerut. They went there seeking Zafar's blessing for the uprising, which he reluctantly gave. On their arrival, the city's Christians, whether European or Indian, were massacred. The loss of Delhi was a huge blow for the British, and its recapture became an immediate priority. With the army spreading over a vast distance, though, gathering enough men to retake the city was a time-consuming task, which meant that an immediate counterattack was impossible. By June 8th, a small force of 4,000 men had managed to capture a ridge just outside Delhi, but with 30,000 mutineers inside the city, this was still not enough to attempt a full-on assault. The 4,000 men on the ridge were forced to spend the summer months desperately holding their position against continuous attacks, whilst dealing with searing heat and outbreaks of disease within the camp. It was not until September 14th, by which time a force of 9,000 men had been scraped together, that an attack on the city was considered practical. British gunners were able to breach the walls and the Kashmir Gate was destroyed, allowing British forces to flood into the city. The fighting was bitter, and it was another week before the mutineers were finally suppressed, and Delhi once again became a British possession. In the immediate aftermath of the assault, the residents of Delhi were once again made to suffer, this time at the hands of the British, as troops murdered and looted their way across the city. Kanpur was another strategically important city, situated at a major crossing point on the river Ganges, and at a crossroads between two major highways. In June 1857, local sepoys rose up and attacked the city's British garrison. Major General Sir Hugh Wheeler, the commander of the British garrison, along with 1,000 of his men, was forced to retreat to an entrenchment outside the city, where they were besieged for 3 weeks. Upon learning that a British relief force had been dispatched, Nana Sahib, a local ruler who was in command of the city's mutineers, offered the British soldiers safe passage down the river. As the men were boarding the boats that they believed were to take them to safety, they were ambushed and wiped out. On July 15th, 120 European women and children who had survived the initial uprising were massacred and their bodies disposed of down a well. The following day, the relief force, under the command of Major General Sir Henry Havelock, arrived. The British reprisals for the massacre were swift and so brutal that this period has colloquially become known as the Devil's Wind. Many thousands of supposed mutineers were hanged without trial, and certainly many innocent civilians were also killed. When trials did take place, the favored method of execution for those convicted of mutiny was known as blowing from a gun. Each man was tied with his back positioned against the muzzle of a cannon. The firing of the gun resulted in the head and limbs being blown off and the total destruction of the torso. That this method was chosen was significant for its violence, but also for the local religious customs. The complete collection of remains and ritual preparation of the body was utterly impossible, meaning that the punishment for the condemned was seen to extend from this life into the next. After these events, Kanpur was held by the British until late November, when it was once again retaken by the rebels. Their victory was short-lived, though, as on December 6th, British forces once again attacked and retook the city for the final time. Lucknow, the capital of the state of Oda, which had only been annexed in the previous year, was under the command of companyman Sir Henry Lawrence. On May 30th, the city became the site of yet another rebellion by local sepoys. Lawrence, already aware of reports about the uprising from other regions, had taken steps to reinforce his residency and so was not completely unprepared when it was besieged at the end of June. Nevertheless, 1,600 soldiers, about half of whom were sepoys loyal to the British, and a similar number of civilians were trapped inside the residency until the end of November, when a relief force was finally able to break the rebel lines. Lawrence himself did not survive the siege, having been killed when a shell detonated in his room. A small garrison was stationed just outside of the city to curtail any offensive actions that the rebels might have planned, but it was not until the following March, when a large enough force had been gathered, that the city was finally recaptured. The final stages of the uprising took place in central India, mainly in the vicinity of Jhansi, a city under the control of Rani Lakshmi Bai. The Rani was sympathetic to the rebels and angry over the British annexation of her state, and in June of 1857, locally stationed regiments from the Bengal Army rebelled. In March of 1858, British forces under the command of Major General Sir Hugh Rose marched on the city, and on the 22nd of that month, Jhansi was put under siege. The prospect of taking the city was an extremely challenging one. The fort was arguably one of the most formidable in India, and the city itself had a very effective military defense. Rose was a very competent and experienced commander, who at earlier stages in the campaign had been known to take several well-defended targets in just a few days. The siege at Jhansi, though, took 2 weeks to accomplish its aims. On April 3rd, the city walls were stormed, although bitter street fighting continued for several more days. The British, with their tempers no doubt inflamed by an earlier massacre of British soldiers, civilians, and Indian servants that had taken place inside the fortress, showed little sympathy of the inhabitants of Jhansi. At least 5,000 defenders were killed, including the entire adult male population of the city. Despite the savagery of the British attack and the determination that no one would be allowed to escape, the Rani did, in fact, manage to get away. Throughout the spring and early summer, Rose won a series of victories over the rebel forces. On the 17th of June, at Kota Ki Sarai, Rani Lakshmi Bai was killed in action. By this time, the rebels, under the command of the General Tatya Tope, had regrouped at Gwalior. It was here that on June 19th, and despite the last-minute defection of the Gwalior contingent to their side, the rebels were finally defeated, and the uprising was effectively brought to an end. The Sepoy Uprising may have been defeated, but it ultimately brought about the downfall of the East India Company, although this did linger on in a diminished form until 1874. There had long been concern over the extent of its territories, and the uprising provided the necessary excuse to remove control of the Indian subcontinent from the company and place it in the hands of the British state. Several concessions were made in an attempt to ensure that the uprising would never be repeated. There was to be less direct interference by the British regarding local customs, and the number of British soldiers was increased. In 1877, Queen Victoria had herself declared Empress of India, forcing the local population to live under imperial rule until they finally won their independence on August 15, 1947.